I never thought my own brother would end up marrying my ex, but life has a way of throwing unexpected curveballs. Looking back, I was naive when I started dating Sarah. She was the type of girl I thought would make others envious, beautiful, outgoing, and always dressed to impress. I guess I was trying to make up for being the quiet kid in high school when nobody noticed. I even bought an expensive car I couldn't really afford, just to feel worthy of her. The relationship was intense from the start. Sarah would constantly check my phone, call me multiple times a day to know where I was, and get upset if I talked to any female friend or coworkers. At the time, I thought she just needed reassurance, so I did everything I could to make her feel secure. I introduced her to my close friend, thinking it would help. Instead, they pulled me aside and warned me that something wasn't right. "She's trouble," my best friend Marcus told me, but I was convinced they were just jealous of my relationship. Then came the family introduction. I have an older brother, Ben, who, despite being 3 years older than me, often acts like he's still in college. I thought bringing Sarah to our family beach vacation would be perfect. My parents, Ben, Sarah, and me spending quality time together. I couldn't have been more wrong. On the second day, Sarah started a huge argument because she claimed I was staring at another woman on the beach. I wasn't, but she wouldn't hear it. She slapped me and stormed off. I was angry and didn't follow her immediately, but after an hour, I started worrying. My parents had gone into town for shopping, so I searched the beach area for Sarah. When I returned to the beach house, I found something I'll never forget: Sarah and Ben in a compromising position on the couch. My world crashed around me. Sarah's excuse? She said it was my fault for looking at other women. Ben claimed he thought Sarah wasn't really my type anyway, and they'd be better together. After the breakup, I discovered Sarah had been seeing multiple men throughout our relationship. She would go on expensive dates with them and let them buy her gifts. I was just one of many in her rotation. When Ben announced he was going to marry her, I tried to warn him. I showed him evidence of her past behavior, but he dismissed everything. Sarah had convinced him that she was just exploring her options before finding her perfect match, supposedly him. Money was never an issue in our family. Our dad had invested well in real estate, and we lived in apartments he owned. Ben had a good job and spent freely, which I'm sure attracted Sarah. The wedding was a lavish affair, paid for mostly by our parents. The guest list was shocking. I later found out that many of the male guests were Sarah's former lovers. Her own family didn't even attend. I refused to go to the wedding, which caused a huge fight with Ben. He called me jealous and said I couldn't handle his happiness. That was the last time we spoke for 5 years. Recently, my mom called saying Ben wanted to reconcile because Sarah was pregnant. He insisted on showing me how wrong I'd been about Sarah, bragging about their perfect marriage. When I visited them, he even mocked me for being single. Something didn't feel right about the whole situation, so I started asking around about Sarah. What I discovered about Sarah wasn't surprising, but the extent of it was shocking. Through various contacts and social media, I found out she'd been meeting different men whenever Ben was away on business trips. One of them, a businessman named Michael, reached out to me after a bad falling out with her. He shared messages showing Sarah was not just seeing him, but coordinating with multiple men for shopping trips and fancy dinners. Michael claimed he had no idea she was married. Then something strange happened. Sarah called me one day, claiming there was an emergency and she needed help since Ben was at work. Being pregnant, I couldn't just ignore her. When I arrived, she tried to proposition me, suggesting we could sleep together and keep her affairs secret from Ben. I left immediately, disgusted. But Sarah turned it around on me, telling Ben I had tried to blackmail and seduce her. I tried showing Ben all the evidence I had collected about Sarah's affairs, including Michael's messages, but he wouldn't hear it. He was furious, accusing me of trying to ruin his marriage out of jealousy. When I tried getting our parents involved, hoping they could talk sense into him, Ben accused me of turning the whole family against Sarah. Our mom was especially worried, knowing Ben was about to have a child with someone who couldn't be trusted. Our dad had given up trying to reason with Ben, saying he was being deliberately blind to the truth. Mom tried talking to him several times, but Ben was convinced I had manipulated her into believing lies about Sarah. Things changed dramatically when Sarah went into labor. Our parents were stuck in another state due to bad weather, so I went to the hospital to support my brother. The delivery was complicated, but eventually, Sarah gave birth to a baby boy. That's when things got interesting. The baby had distinct features that didn't match either Ben or Sarah. Most notably, the child had clearly Asian features, while both Ben and Sarah were Caucasian. I could see the doubt growing on Ben's face every time he looked at the baby. He started acting distant, barely holding his son or showing any emotional connection. A few days later, Ben showed up at my apartment, finally ready to talk. He admitted what we both knew: the baby couldn't be his. He revealed they had always used protection, but Sarah had somehow ended up pregnant anyway. I showed him all the evidence I had collected over the months, and he finally accepted the truth. He spent the whole night at my place, crying and processing everything while Sarah kept calling him about the baby. I suggested a paternity test, which confirmed what we already suspected: Ben wasn't the father. When confronted with the results, Sarah threw a massive tantrum, accusing Ben of not trusting her and going behind her back for the test. She started throwing things around the house, forcing Ben to take the baby to our parents' place for safety. The divorce proceedings were messy. Sarah initially denied everything and accused Ben of faking the DNA results. When a second test confirmed the same results, she tried claiming she had used a sperm donor through IVF. When she couldn't prove this claim, the court granted the divorce on grounds of adultery. She got custody of the child since Ben had no legal rights to him, but her demands for child support and maintenance were denied since the baby wasn't his. Sarah started harassing me, blaming me for ruining her marriage. She begged Ben to take her back, claiming she had nowhere to go with the baby. Despite everything, our parents offered her temporary housing in one of their rental properties until she could find work. I thought she didn't deserve their kindness, but that's just how my parents are. Things got more complicated after the divorce. Sarah took advantage of my parents' kindness in the worst way. She would drop her baby at their house early morning, claiming she was job hunting, and sometimes wouldn't return until midnight. Some days she wouldn't show up at all. My mom basically became an unpaid full-time babysitter. When my dad finally put his foot down about the babysitting, Sarah threw a fit, calling them heartless for not helping a single mother. My mom, being too kind, gave in and kept watching the baby. I decided to help Sarah find a job to get her out of my parents' lives, but what I discovered made my blood boil. Instead of job hunting, she was spending her days with a new boyfriend who had moved into her apartment. This guy worked from home and apparently didn't like the baby's crying, so Sarah was using my parents as free childcare. Once I exposed this, my parents gave her notice to leave their property. Her boyfriend, who was just using her for free housing, disappeared as soon as she asked him to find them a new place. Sarah ended up moving in with her friend and took a job I'd found her as a cleaner at a daycare center. The daycare would watch her baby while she worked, which seemed perfect. The situation with my brother remained tense. After reading comments from people I'd shared my story with online, I decided not to cut ties completely, but to maintain some distance. When I finally reached out to him, I found him struggling with shame and depression. He apologized for not believing me and for all the things he'd said, including mocking me for being single. We talked about how he had broken the trust between us by getting together with my girlfriend. It was a difficult conversation, but necessary for healing. Meanwhile, Sarah's life continued its downward spiral. She didn't last long at the daycare job. After sleeping with her manager and getting promoted to a helper position, she proved incompetent at childcare. Parents complained about how she treated their kids, and eventually, even her relationship with the manager couldn't save her job. The real twist came when Sarah finally tracked down her baby's biological father. James was a wealthy businessman of Asian descent, married to a teacher named Linda. When Sarah showed up at their doorstep demanding support, James initially denied everything. But a court-ordered paternity test proved he was the father. Linda, who couldn't have children of her own, initially considered seeking custody, but James wasn't interested in being involved with the child. The court ordered James to pay child support, giving Sarah a substantial monthly income. But instead of using it for her child's welfare, she returned to her old ways, leaving the baby at daycare while she pursued new relationships. Her reputation in our small town was completely ruined by this point. Things took a dark turn when Sarah got involved with some dangerous people. She ended up overdosing at her apartment, and her child was found wandering the streets, nearly getting hit by a car. The neighbors discovered Sarah unconscious and called authorities. The child, who had been exposed to drugs and smoke, was taken by Child Protective Services. In an unexpected turn of events, Linda, James's wife, divorced him over the affair and got custody of the child. She turned out to be an amazing mother, even letting my parents visit occasionally since they'd grown attached to the baby. Sarah, after recovering from her overdose, tried to extort money from Linda by threatening to take the child back, but ended up with a restraining order instead. Looking back, Sarah could have had a good life with my brother if she'd just been faithful. My brother would have given her everything she wanted legitimately. Instead, her choices led to her losing everything: her marriage, her child, and her dignity. The only silver lining is that the baby ended up with Linda, who gives him the stable, loving home he deserves. My brother and I have slowly rebuilt our relationship. We occasionally hear updates about Sarah through town gossip, but we've both moved on. He's learned his lesson about trust and infidelity the hard way, and I've learned to forgive him for his betrayal. Sometimes the hardest lessons in life come from the people closest to us. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with friends or family who might enjoy it too. Your support means a lot. And if you have any thoughts, questions, or story ideas, drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. See you in the next story.